Hello there, my name is Matt LeMay, and I am going to talk to you today about Agile beyond the product team. Before we get started, a little bit about myself. I am the author of 2 books for O'Reilly Media, one called Agile for Everybody, from which a lot of the things I will talk about today are directly drawn. One called Product Management in Practice, which I like to tell people is a catalog of all the mistakes I made in my 5 years as a career product manager, and some advice on how not to make those same mistakes. Right now, most of my work is through a company called Sudden Compass I co-founded. Sudden Compass is all about bringing customer centricity from theory to practice, so taking organizations who talk big about customer centricity and showing them how to do it. We've worked with companies like Spotify, Procter & Gamble, Clorox, Kickstarter, big companies, small companies, companies in all different industries. It's been really fun and really interesting. Prior to that, most of my work was in product management. I was head of consumer product at Bitly here in New York, and I was a senior product manager at Songza, which was acquired by Google. Prior to all that, I was a professional musician, which is another topic entirely, which we will not discuss in this conversation. What we will talk about, though, is Agile. And I want to tell you about the first time I ever heard the word Agile, because I think it says a lot about how we use the term and how much it confuses people and how difficult it makes it for us to actually extend Agile beyond product teams. So I was working as a product manager at a tech startup here in New York, and we were going through a moment of major transition. People were leaving, people were joining, and at an all-hands meeting, company leadership stood up in front of us and said, "We've been going too slow. We are not moving fast enough. But I have some great news. We are going to begin using Agile processes, which will allow us to get twice the work done in half the time." And I stood there and said, "That sounds really great, but I have no idea what it means." So like any self-respecting product manager would do, I went back to my desk and frantically Googled Agile. What is Agile? How is Agile? Do you Agile? And what I found was a lot of things that sounded really good, like self-organizing teams and sprint-based development and incremental and iterative development. But I had no idea what any of those things meant either. It was a lot of things I didn't know defined by other things I didn't know. So I went to some of the engineers on my team and I said, "What's this Agile thing all about? How do we Agile?" And they said, "Oh, Agile is a bunch of stuff you do. It's a bunch of rituals. You stand up in the morning and have a daily stand-up meeting, like this one you see on the slide." They said you have something called a retrospective at the end of a sprint, which is about 2 weeks of work that you do. And I said, okay, I guess that's what we're supposed to do. So we started doing Agile. We had daily stand-ups. We worked in 2-week sprints. We had retrospectives at the end of the 2-week sprints. But it certainly didn't result in us doing twice the work in half the time. If anything, it actually kind of made things worse for us. We were miscommunicating with leadership and with our counterparts in the organization way worse than we were before we started doing Agile. And when I started talking to people, what I realized was that everybody actually had a very different idea about what Agile meant and why we were doing it. So for those executives who had introduced Agile to us in the first place, Agile was a way for us to do the things they wanted us to do faster. They said, just go do this Agile stuff. I don't really understand it, but it means when I give you 6 months of work to do, I expect you to do it in 2 weeks. For the engineers on my team, they said, Agile is about us taking ownership of the work that we do. It's a chance for us to decide what we're going to build and how we're going to build it, not for those leaders to tell us what to do. You can already see how well this is designed to work out, right? For marketers in the organization, they had been through Agile transformations before, and I couldn't figure out why they seemed so upset about the fact that we were talking about Agile. Until we started talking to them, and they said, yeah, Agile usually just means that the software developers, the product teams, stop telling us when they're going to finish anything. They say, we're Agile, we don't have deadlines anymore, so we can't do our jobs anymore. So as we embarked upon this quote-unquote Agile transformation, leadership, developers, marketers, everybody had a different idea of what it meant, and those ideas were deeply at odds with each other. In the 10 years or so since I had this experience, Agile has exploded. Agile is everywhere. Agile transformation, much like digital transformation was in the 2000s, is something that every organization is talking about and trying to go through. And yet, as Agile has expanded to be something for marketers, something for sales, we've got Agile marketing, Agile leadership, Agile sales, Agile HR, Agile everything all the time. That underlying problem I experienced is only getting worse. As all these different types of Agile take root in all these different functional corners of organizations, there is still an enormous amount of misalignment about what Agile means and why we're doing it in the first place. For a lot of executives, Agile is still shorthand for do what I want you to do just faster. For a lot of development teams, Agile is still shorthand for we want control over the work that we do. For a lot of Agile marketing, Agile sales, Agile HR teams, they don't really know what it means yet, but they know that it's something they want, and they know that it's something they should be paying attention to. So the question which I like to ask, and which I think we need to really understand as we approach Agile beyond product teams, is how do we make Agile a common language that connects and aligns and unites these teams, rather than this set of assumptions which allows each team to operate in a different way while still saying, we're doing the right thing, we're doing Agile, you said you wanted an Agile, you got an Agile. How do we make Agile this North Star that guides us forward together, aligning and uniting us while still giving us room to do the work we need to do in the way that we know how to do it? So when I started writing Agile for Everybody, and I talked to a lot of people from a lot of different organizations, people who work in marketing, people who work in sales, people who work in HR, organizational leaders, independent consultants, and I found that there was one common theme that united every successful implementation of Agile beyond the product team. And it wasn't a single framework, it wasn't a single methodology, it wasn't that they changed all their business analysts to product owners and they implemented a particular framework at scale. It was that they were paying attention to these three things. And these are the three things that we're going to walk through together to understand how we can effectively use Agile to connect and align the work we do across teams in an organization. The first thing they had was a company-wide North Star, a set of principles and values that everybody in every team could follow together to say, this is why we're doing this in the first place. They also had Agile practices, ways of working. This is what a lot of teams think of as the sum total of Agile, but this is one important part of this overall system. Now again, the teams I worked with, the folks I spoke to who've done this successfully, as we will discuss, know that there's no one right way to do Agile. It's not about making every team work the same way. It's about empowering each team to work in a way that works best for them, and then finding the right way for those teams to work together. Every organization I've worked with that's successfully implemented Agile also has really good goals. And when I say goals, I mean the actual things that they are trying to accomplish by changing the way they work. They know what they're trying to accomplish, and they pay really close attention to whether these new ways of working are actually helping them get there or not. And if they are, they keep doing them. And if they're not, they change them. It's simple, but it's not easy. The first thing we're going to talk about is this North Star of principles and values. How do we frame Agile as a principles and values first movement? How do we get people to understand why they should care about Agile and get them to understand it in the same way across functions and disciplines and roles, so we don't wind up with different people thinking that Agile means different things? Now, this is actually pretty easy because Agile has always been a values-first movement. When the Agile Manifesto was written back in 2001, those 17 independent software developers who wrote it didn't argue about which methodology is the best one. We should do Scrum, we should do XP, we should do Crystal. There's only one right way to do Agile. They said, we know that every team is going to have different needs. What matters isn't whether you follow the rules and rituals to the letter. What matters is whether you understand and embody the values that underlie each of these different ways of working. The Agile Manifesto is 68 words long. It is not a terribly long and complicated document, but it is an enormous challenge to business as usual. And when we start by actually taking time to think about why are we turning to Agile? What does Agile mean? What does Agile mean to us as an organization? We realize that this is going to be a challenge for us. This is going to result in us having to actually rethink some pretty fundamental things about how and why we work together. Now, in Agile for Everybody, I do something that many before me and many since me will continue to do, which is I attempt to frame up my own set of Agile principles. Now, again, I'm not saying these are the best ones, these are the only ones. A lot of folks have done this. Alistair Coburn, one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto, wrote The Heart of Agile, which is 4 words that he thinks really capture the heart, the essence of the Agile movement. Stephen Denning, in the book The Age of Agile, has 3 laws for Agile teams, which are similarly instructive but high level. How do we organize ourselves in a way that lives up to the values and principles of Agile? Now, in my book, Agile for Everybody, I was asking the question, how do we frame up the underlying values of Agile in a way that's equally accessible to marketers and salespeople and executives and HR folks as it is to the software developers who've been using Agile practices for decades now? And I came up with 3 things. Number 1, Agile means that we start with our customers. Agile is an intrinsically customer-centric movement in ways that we will discuss in a moment. Number 2, Agile means that we collaborate early and often. Agile means that we're not starting with just our function, just the people on our team. We recognize and we accept and we understand the value of working in a truly cross-functional way, not just when it's time for the designers to do their work or when it's time for the marketers to do their marketing, but throughout the entire process of delivering valuable things to our customers. And last but not least, Agile means that we plan for uncertainty. And we're going to discuss how having really good goals in place paradoxically makes it easier for us to adjust course. If we have a really good sense of what we're moving towards, it's actually easier for us to change our path to getting there. Now, when I talked about Agile as a customer-centric movement, this is one area where it's really valuable for us to take a step back and say, even though the Agile movement originated with software development, those principles in the Agile Manifesto are not just about software development. So for example, the Agile Manifesto says working software over comprehensive documentation. And sometimes people come to me and they say, Matt, love the idea of Agile, but we're not making working software. This doesn't apply to us. To which I ask, okay, well, why is working software more valuable than comprehensive documentation? What is the actual value underlying this? Because it's not just about working software. Working software is something our customers can use. It's something that creates value and learning. Comprehensive documentation is just something that makes us feel like we're getting work done. Now, if we take that concept and apply it to different kinds of work, we see how the underlying ideas of Agile are so broadly applicable to different types of work. For example, if we're marketers, then a social media message test, something that gets the message out to our customers and gives us a chance to react to their reaction, that's working software. If we make a year-long marketing plan that says, here's what we're going to do now, here's what we're going to do in 6 months, here's what we're going to do in 11 months, our customers don't see that. They can't use that. That is not delivering something valuable to the people who need it. That's us doing busy work to feel busy. Now, I'm not saying no planning ever. I'm not saying you can't have a yearly marketing plan. I'm saying that if we truly let these Agile principles and values challenge us, challenge the status quo, change why we do the work that we do, we have to be willing to reevaluate some pretty fundamental things. My favorite example on this slide is, for me as an author, writing a book proposal as comprehensive documentation. I can't send you my book proposal for you to read and you'll walk away knowing if it's going to be a good book or not. A sample chapter, something you can read and interact with the same way you would the actual book I'm writing, that's working software. So as you look to scale these Agile principles and values throughout your organization, one question you can ask is, what is our working software? How do we get out of intermediate states and start delivering valuable things to the customers who need them right away. Now, as you may have noticed, I am in fact suggesting that these are questions that you will need to ask and answer for your organization specifically. I'm not saying the Agile Manifesto is the one true north and you should all follow it the same way. I'm not saying my 3 guiding principles of Agile for everybody are the one true north. I'm saying you need to figure out for your organization what values, what principles will animate you, will get you to really rethink the way that you work and why you work the way that you do. Now, in some circles, this is seen as a very bad idea. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, you can't just start customizing Agile principles and values. These are that way for a reason. What's to stop you from coming up with a North Star that completely debases and dilutes the value of the Agile movement? And that's a totally fair question. But in my experience, I've found that the greater danger is that you will start with a North Star that does not speak to the specific needs, values, principles, ideas, and language of your organization. You'll start with something that seems like a poor fit, and then a year and a half later, you'll come back and say, yeah, those values and principles didn't really have anything to do with us. Jody Leo, who is an incredible UX practitioner and Agile advocate who's worked at organizations like the New York Times, Google, Apple, she said this to me, and it really changed the way I think about this. She said things always start to go sideways when Agile paradigms are introduced that have absolutely nothing to do with the way that a company is set up to work. And I think she really nailed here what the problem is. If we don't take the opportunity to say, this is our North Star, this is what matters to us, we run the risk that we're going to set off in a direction that we didn't really believe in from the beginning. And if we don't believe in that North Star, if we don't really believe that these values and principles speak to what we do and why we do it, they're not going to get us very far. So one question I would ask you to think about right now, what is your organization's North Star? What are the principles and values that make your organization unique? Why do you wake up and go to work every morning? What do you care about? And when you start asking this question, it opens up a world where Agile is not one of many choices on a menu. It's a set of principles and values that are often deeply aligned with what you're already doing. And I'll share with you an example of this. My partners at Sudden Compass and I were working with a company and sharing some of these Agile value statements. And the executive leadership at this company said, we can't do Agile. We already have a big initiative underway about external focus. It can't be Agile. We already have external focus. In your organization, it might be, we can't have Agile, we already have design thinking. We can't have Agile, we already have lean startup. We can't have Agile, we already have some new thing that somebody just made up and that's the new thing. What I really like about this approach of finding your North Star is that it doesn't end the conversation there. You're not debating why Agile is better than something else. You're saying, great, what are the values and principles at the heart of this? What does external focus really mean to you? Why is this the language that this organization has chosen to adopt to guide the work that it does? And with this particular organization, when we were talking to them, they said, well, I guess we hadn't really thought about it. But I guess what external focus is really about is that we're looking to the customers and to the market before we just keep doing business the way we've always done it. And we said, that's great. That's your principle. That's part of your North Star right there. Doesn't even really matter whether you call it Agile or not. When you get to the heart, to the message of these guiding principles and values, there's always a way forward. There's always a move. There's always an opportunity to dimensionalize and contextualize the language that's already inspiring people at your organization and to clarify how that's going to change the way that you work. It's time to change the way that you work. It's time to look towards our Agile practices, at the way we are going to take those guiding principles and values, take that North Star, and put it into practice for each of our different teams. Now, this is often where the org charts come out. This is where it becomes, all right, Agile, got it, principles, values, that's all good. Let's reorg everybody. Let's put everybody into squads. Let's put everybody into cross-functional 2-pizza teams like Amazon does. Let's change everything about how everybody works. And what I'm here to tell you is that it does not have to be that complicated. Yes, there is a place for reorgs. Yes, there is a place for scaled frameworks. But oftentimes, the most impactful changes, the most impactful ways of working are small and simple. Oftentimes, once we have these principles and values guiding us, once we start asking that question, what's a little change you can make to the way that you work that's going to get us closer to our North Star? We realize we don't have to wait for an executive steering committee to implement a new scaled framework. Each team is actually pretty solidly in control of its own destiny, and there are little changes they can make that will actually help guide them towards that shared North Star. Michelle Peluso, the CMO at IBM, is somebody who has had a lot of success bringing agile ways of working into a marketing environment. And when I interviewed her for the book, she said something that really stuck with me. She said, sometimes people come to me and they say, we as marketers can't work with the product team. They have different ways of working. Their agile practices are different from our agile practices, so we can't work together. And she said, if you just approach this really practically, if you say, all right, here's how they work, here's how we work, how can we work together? There's always a way. You have more control over your destiny than you realize. And I really like this way of thinking about Agile because it's very practical, but it's not very prescriptive. It's not saying this is how every team needs to work, or this is the only way that a marketing team and a product team and a sales team can interface with each other. It's saying if each team is changing the way they work in a way that works for them, we actually have a pretty simple set of questions to answer, which is how do we work? How do they work? How do we work together? And the answers to those questions can be pretty simple and pretty powerful. My very favorite example of a small but impactful and very simple change to the way a team works based on guiding principles and values comes from Coca-Cola, and comes from a marketing team at Coca-Cola that set about to do a very difficult thing. They were tasked with delivering a marketing campaign for the 2014 World Cup that involved one creative agency and one technical agency who did not get along with each other very well. These two agencies had once been the same agency. They were no longer the same agency. There was a lot of static and miscommunication between these two agencies. And the marketing folks at Coca-Cola had to manage those disagreements. So Thomas Stubbs, who was running this team for Coca-Cola, said, one of the principles I've always followed in my work is that when people have a disagreement, they should get in the room and solve it together. He called this a hothouse approach. And in his mind, he told me this had nothing to do with Agile. We just had a principle that we tried to follow as a team, which was, if you have a disagreement, get in a room and sort it out. So he said, here's what we're going to do. For my team and for these two agencies, if we have a decision we need to make, we're not going to send an email and we're not going to send a PowerPoint presentation to each other. No emails, no PowerPoints, unless it's just a status update. If there is a decision that needs to be made, we are going to get in the room and make that decision together. Now, again, this is not terribly complicated, right? This is not a complex framework that everybody needs to read a 300-page manual to understand. This is a simple but meaningful change rooted in principles and values. And the effect of this change was really interesting. It was not easy for people. People had to hash things out. They had to be uncomfortable together. They had to say things directly that were much easier to say passive-aggressively over email. But at the end of this campaign, something happened which nobody expected. They finished early. I don't know how many of y'all have worked on big event-based marketing campaigns, but the idea of finishing one early is mind-blowing. It is an incredible outcome for any set of changes to ways of working. And again, the change itself was not that big and not that complicated. They had a principle, they followed it, they made one meaningful change, and that helped them deliver a better outcome than they even imagined. Now, what I want to emphasize here, I'm not telling you go off and get rid of all your emails. I'm not saying never send a PowerPoint presentation again, ban PowerPoints. That might work for your team or it might not. What I want to emphasize here is that every team is different and every team needs different ways of working. The very first value of the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That's a big challenge when you really think about it. That's saying there is no one Agile process or tool set that will work for every set of individuals and the way they interact. When we talk about Agile as a challenging, values-based movement, that is really challenging. It would be great if we could all just start working a certain way and everything would be better. But that's not how the real world works. What's nice is that there are so many different ways of working for us to choose from. I encourage people to take a that's also approach as opposed to a that's actually approach, which is to say, when you're looking at different ways of working, different Agile practices you could adopt that are very well documented, like the stand-up, the retrospective, sprint-based work, user stories, all these practices that exist out there, don't debate, that's actually not Agile, that's actually more this thing, this is actually that, this is actually not Agile, this is actually a lean startup thing, that's actually more of a design thinking thing you got right there. No, who cares? The question is, maybe that's also something that would be valuable for our team. What do we as a team need to do to respect our individuality, to respect the needs of the team and the way we work, and to follow that North Star so that each team can coordinate together even if the way we work is necessarily different? One question I love asking people. I love asking people this question. I love asking you this question right now. What is one small change you could make to put your North Star into practice for your team? So this is where this really starts to get cooking, right? Because you might say, oh yeah, we have a North Star, but we don't do anything about it. We have a mission statement, but it's all nonsense. We had a town hall where we said we do these things, we love our customers, but that's not how we work. All right, that happens. What is one small change you could make? Not you can wait for a steering committee to make, not you can hire a consultant to make. What is one small change you can make right now, to put your North Star into practice for your team? Again, there's always a move, there's always a step, there's always something you can do, and if you're not sure, there's so much great stuff out there about all these different Agile ways of working. The gift I'm giving you is that you no longer have to decide what the one truest, best way to work is. You can just say, which of these do I think would land us somewhere better than we are right now? And how do we try it for a little while? This leads us to our last important piece of this three-part system. Now, we might think that this change is going to make things better for us, right? We might say, yep, I like that idea. I like that idea of no emails, no PowerPoints. Let's do it. Let's try it for a month and see what happens. That's great. It's really important that you pay attention to what actually happens and you prepare yourself to adjust course if you do not achieve your goals. This last piece that we need so badly is to understand what we are working towards. What are the actual outcomes of these changes to our ways of working? What are these enabling for our colleagues and our customers? And then, is it happening or not? If we think, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to be faster. We think we're going to be able to hit this deadline, which we weren't able to hit before. Are we doing it? Or are we not? This is a statistic that completely blows my mind. I want to just take a moment, deep breath. So the version 1 State of Agile report, which is the biggest survey of Agile practitioners in the world, was released for 2018 a while ago. And this statistic broke my brain, which is that 4% of respondents said that Agile practices are actually enabling them to be more adaptable to market conditions. Take a moment, think about that. 4% of people doing Agile think that Agile makes you agile. See the problem with that? I read this, and this was, you can see in the timestamp here, this was like a minute and a half into their summary video. I'm like, why is everybody not freaking out about this? If 4% of the people following a set of rules and rituals believe that those rules and rituals are actually helping them be more adaptable, Why are they doing it? Why are people not saying, hey, this isn't working, we got to change something? A lot of people have written things about this. Andy Hunt, who's one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto, described it as the joy of rules, that we like the comfort and safety of following rules more than we like the danger and accountability of making sure those rules serve us. But a lot of organizations are not actually paying attention to what happens as they implement these Agile practices, and are not adjusting course if, like 96% of the people who responded to this survey, it's not helping them get to where they need to be. This lands them in what I call the frameworks trap, and perhaps you are watching this video from inside that trap right now. The way that the frameworks trap operates is that a company looks around and says, we are slow and inflexible. We are not agile. We must pick an agile framework to be agile. So they go out there, they hire some consultants maybe, they're sold a silver bullet framework. This will solve all your problems. I don't know what your problems are, but trust us, we know how to solve them. They come in and they start implementing these new rules. They say, we're all doing stand-ups. We're all product owners now. All of our marketers are writing user stories. We're going to do Agile everywhere. But they're not actually empowering teams to take ownership and accountability over the way they work. They're not asking teams, what are you really trying to accomplish here? What do you think will happen when you try these new rituals? And how are you going to adjust course if those things don't happen? Which, as we've seen, they probably won't. It is very unlikely that your first guess about a best new way of working is actually going to work as well as you think it will, because people are unpredictable and nonlinear. So what winds up happening is that they land right back where they started, because they follow the rules and the rituals. They say, we checked all the boxes, we did all the things the consultants told us we're supposed to do, and we're still inflexible. We're still slow. We must find a new framework. The framework has failed us. But it's not the framework that failed them. They failed themselves. They failed to say, these new ways of working, these rituals, they are only valuable to us insofar as they help steer us towards our North Star and they help us achieve the particular goals of my team and my business. Now, when it comes to setting goals, there's a lot of great stuff out there, just as there's a lot of great stuff about Agile practices for changing the way that you work. You've got your KPIs, you've got your OKRs or objectives and key results. You've got SMART goals, you've got clear goals, you've got V2MOM, which folks at Salesforce will talk your ear off about. They love V2MOM. I'm not here to tell you which of these is the best, because as we've said many times, every organization's needs are different, every team's needs are different. You might start trying one of these and say, this doesn't work for us, let's try a different one. That's fine, so long as you know what you're working towards. Now, what's really important here, again, is not the tool you use, but rather that you know what you are working towards at any given time. That you and your team know what success means for you, and you know how that contributes to the overall success of the organization. Because if we don't know those things, we cannot adjust course the way we need to, and we fall in the frameworks trap. Now, one thing that often happens if we haven't really taken the time to understand these things is that two teams will actually be working towards goals that are at odds with each other. And I'll give you an example of this, which I've seen at about 75% of the companies I've worked with. Now, at most companies, often in the marketing function, there's one team responsible for bringing new people in the door, a growth team, whose job is to get new folks using this product or service, as many people as you can. Their goals are growth goals. How many people can we get in the door? Now, most organizations that have a team responsible for growth also have a team responsible for revenue per customer or lifetime value. How do we maximize the value of each person using our product or service? Seems fair enough, right? Or does it? Let's say that first team, that growth team, they're following the North Star. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to do Agile. It's going to be awesome. We're going to make our numbers go up. They start changing the way they work. They become more effective. They bring in 10,000 new users, brand new people. Hooray. But what does that mean for the second team? Suddenly, their average value per user is going way down because there are 10,000 new people in the mix who haven't bought anything or done anything yet. And in fact, maybe that first team has been bringing in people who they know aren't going to do anything, who they don't actually think are going to be good, qualified users. They're just optimizing for their metric. They're like, well, we just want to get more people in the room. We don't really care if they're good people or not. That's this other team's problem. So what happens? Framework trap happens. People look at it and they say, this isn't working. We don't believe in this. This has led us astray. Those other people are out to get me. They don't understand me. It undermines the whole system. We need to have good goals in place. We need to know what we are working towards, and we need to know how our contributions align harmoniously with what the organization is trying to achieve overall and what other teams are doing. Because again, if we don't know that, if we don't have that, we cannot tell whether the new practices we're implementing are successful or not, which means that eventually we will declare them to be a failure. Now, one thing that I find really funny about this has taken me a long time to accept. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, my background is in music. I am not a person who naturally gravitates towards clear and well-stated goals. When you have these goals in place, it actually makes it easier for you to adjust course. When you know where you're going, when you know what outcomes you're looking for, when you're paying really close attention to the outcomes you hoped you would achieve versus the outcomes you are actually achieving, it makes you more flexible. It makes you more agile. One really interesting conversation I had for the book was with someone named Katherine Kuhn, who is an Agile consultant and practitioner and advocate, a really, really smart person thinking about Agile and how it actually works inside organizations. And she told me, look, the reality is if you're working with a bank, for example, you're not going to get them to stop doing yearly planning. You're not going to make compliance not a thing. You're not going to say, you know what, bank, you should be a search engine. Go out there and have fun and do whatever you want. But if you have really good yearly goals, you can start adding a really productive quarterly review. You can say, all right, if we know what done looks like, if we know what each thing we're doing is intended to achieve, maybe we can meet up every quarter and say, hey, this thing is actually 85% done. We've actually gotten pretty close to achieving what we wanted to achieve, to having the outcomes we wanted to have. So maybe we can reallocate some resources, put some of our resources behind something that's only 20% where we wanted it to be. It took me a long time to really understand this. This is why one of my 3 guiding principles of Agile for Everybody is that Agile means that we plan for uncertainty. Having clear and well-stated goals doesn't make us more rigid. It actually makes us more flexible. It actually gives us permission to change the way we're working because working a certain way isn't the goal anymore. It means, you know what? The goal of an Agile transformation is not to have daily stand-up meetings, is not to say, look, we reorged everybody. All of our business analysts are product owners. Check, 100% Agile adoption. Nailed it. We're doing this because we want to have certain outcomes for our colleagues and our customers. And once we have those outcomes clearly understood, both for our team and for the organization at large, we are free. We are free to change the way we work, to change the way we allocate resources, to help us actually steer closer to those outcomes while honoring and respecting those North Star principles and values at the heart of the changes we're making. A question I have for you, and honestly, I think and hope everybody should be able to answer this question. What are your team's objectives for this quarter, and how do they support the organization's overall goals? When I'm working with product managers, sometimes people ask me, Matt, is there any situation in which a product manager cannot succeed? What is the hill that's worth dying on? And my answer is, if you don't know what success looks like, if you don't know what you're working towards, you're already dead on that hill. Because you don't know what success looks like. If you don't know what the goals of your team and your organization are, then no amount of agile transformation will ever lead you to success because you don't know what success means. So we've walked through 3 pieces here, right? We've talked about our North Star, our guiding principles and values of Agile, which will help us understand what Agile is going to mean for our organization. That's hopefully going to help us take some of that energy that already exists in pockets of the organization around maybe it's Agile, maybe it's design thinking, maybe it's lean, maybe it's external focus, just around transformation and change in general, and codify it into a North Star that every single person, every single team at the organization can follow together. Then we're going to say, all right, what are some ways of putting this into practice? What are some things we can do? And again, there's so much great stuff to choose from. Pick something, try it, see what happens, and critically, see if it's helping you get where you want to get. The third thing we need for this system to be truly self-sustaining is a clear sense of our goals as a team and how those align with the goals of our organization. Because if we do not know what success looks like, we are destined to fail. And at some point, someone's going to say, this whole Agile thing didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. Rinse and repeat. Business as usual continues. Now, what I've found really interesting when implementing this system within organizations, and even calling it a system feels a little heavyweight for what it actually represents, is that often tensions emerge from this, right? Sometimes our values and our principles seem like they're at odds with the goals we're trying to achieve. And there's one example of this that comes up all the time, which is teams and organizations will put a North Star in place that says we are collaborative. We love to collaborate. We collaborate across functions. But then when they actually look at their quarterly goals, they say, I've got too much to do. Nope. I'm not talking to those other people. They might want to do something different for me. They might slow me down. If I actually want to achieve my goals, then I'm going to have to go against our principles and values. And what's really great here is that it actually gives us something we can use to ask, well, then how do we change the way we work to bring these things closer together? Right? So the question I usually wind up asking teams then is like, all right, well, if collaboration isn't helping you move faster, what is it doing? When people say we can't have meetings because we have work to do, I'm like, well, then what are you doing in your meetings? If meetings aren't helping you get work done, why are you having them? And they say, oh, we can change the way we have meetings in a way that actually helps us bring this system into harmony with itself. You can say, all right, we now know to ask ourselves, how do we collaborate in a way that actually helps us get work done? What's a good meeting versus a bad meeting? What's the difference between true collaboration and sitting in a room together looking at someone walk through a 150-page slide deck? That's not actually collaboration. So the great challenge of this self-sustaining system is that it does not give us an easy or static answer. What this means for us is that there are no silver bullets. There's no one right answer. There's no one perfect methodology or set of secret approaches that are being kept from you that will make your organization agile. If you really want to change your organization, then you've got to ask some tough questions. You've got to say, all right, if we want to change the way we work, why do we want to change the way we work? What's going to motivate people? What do people in this organization actually care about? Why are we looking towards Agile in the first place? What does it really mean for us? If we want marketers and salespeople and HR people and product people and engineers and executives to all change the way they work together, we'd better give them a really good reason. We've got to make this accessible to everybody. And once we know what we're working towards, once we have our North Star to guide us, we've got to say, all right, How do we empower every single team in this organization to change the actual way they work to lead us just a little bit closer to that North Star? Again, the first statement of the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. If you approach Agile as a set of processes and tools that will work the same for every individual, then you are not Agile. I don't know what you are, but you're not Agile. And last but not least, if we're going to ask each team to change the way it works, to have that real, complete ownership over process and practices, we'd better make sure they know whether it's working. We'd better make sure that they have a clear set of goals so they can say, yes, we made this change, it worked. Or, yes, we made this change and it didn't work, so we tried something else. Again, if we know what we're going towards, we have the freedom to adjust course. If the only way we can measure success is did we go through the steps that we were told to go through, then it's going to be a failure one way or another anyhow. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me through Agile Beyond the Product Team. If there's one thing I hope you'll take away from this, it's that extending Agile beyond product teams is not just about telling other teams to work like an Agile product team. It's not about getting marketers to do a daily stand-up or getting sales teams to write user stories. Those are just rituals. It's about getting an entire organization to care about the principles and values at the heart of the Agile movement, and then giving them the empowerment and the autonomy to say, of the infinite different approaches we could take to putting these principles into practice, which ones are actually going to help us achieve our goals? When we take that high-level approach, when we say Agile is not about control, it's about empowerment. It's not about being prescriptive. It's about creating alignment. Then we can make real change. It's going to take time. It's going to mean having some difficult conversations. Above all else, it's going to mean accepting and embracing that the way your marketing team works is always going to be a little bit different from the way your product team works. That the way your engineers work, the way your designers work, the way that different functions in an organization work, it's never going to look exactly the same team to team, function to function. You can't police that by putting a set of rules in place without principles, values, and goals to guide them. When Agile works for an entire organization, everybody is doing things a little bit differently, but everybody's doing them for the same reasons. And that's a really cool thing. Thank you so very much.